so was free from carrying the load. Now I walk lighter on the sacred road. With the step I take, I feel your embrace. Your mercy and love is my saving grace. Chains are broken, finally free. In the shelter of your arms, okay. Okay, so I want to continue, and we were talking about where the preaching came from, or how was the message preached, and where did Christianity come from? What was the origin of Christianity? Because it's not, as I told you, it's not a white man's religion. It was preached to the white man, same way it was preached to us, Black people. Okay, so from this map, remember I told you from my history of teaching and stuff like that, I noticed that people catch things better when they see it visually. Okay, so from this map, you see that during the persecution of 35 AD, Philip travels north with those who have fled to Sibas. Sibas was a principal city of Samaria. That happened in Acts 8, 4 to 8. Many people don't read Acts. We skip Acts most of the time. And I think we should be reading Acts more, especially the modern church, because you need to know where we started or how we started and how far we've come. So in Acts 8, when you continue reading 26 to 39, it showed you that Philip travels south. Okay, so the first move was to travel north. Okay, and the second move was to travel south on the desert road leading from Jerusalem down to Gaza. All right. And on the way, Philip meets a Jewish official from the court of the Queen of Ethiopia. All right. From the court of the Queen of Ethiopia. And this Ethiopian believes in Jesus and is baptized. So he did not just preach to white people, he also preached to Africans. The Ethiopian was an African. That was how the Ethiopian was baptized. And remember, when all these people are baptized, they go back home, they take the good news, okay, and they convert other people, and that's how we get the Ethiopian Bible, even though that too have been corrupted because of doctrines that was mixed along the way due to traditions. Is the same thing that I'll come to talk to you about. The white man's Christianity was also, contaminated in some way by the existing traditions that was already, these people already were practicing. And they took that as a form of religion, but it wasn't a part of Christianity, which was why Paul kept talking about heresy and kept talking about false prophets, and why it is very, very important for us to weed off false prophets, or to come, to speak against the heresies. All right, I don't necessarily like to point fingers on people, but at least speak about the heresies, talk about the thing they are saying that is wrong from the Bible, because that is essentially what we want to fight against. We don't want to fight against people, we want to fight against their doctrines, because the doctrines are wrong. And then the Holy Spirit takes Philip in Acts 8:40 And he goes up north to Ashdod. All right, north. Whenever you hear north, is the white people. Okay, and then south. Whenever you hear south, it's the black people. That's how we separated. Okay. And then Philip spreads the good news of Jesus in all the coastal towns. He passes through um, Caesarea, and then he went to Samaria. So this is all the movements back and forth that he did. Okay, when he went north, he was going to the north. He was going to the white people. Okay, Sebastian, Samaria, and when he was going down south, he met with the Ethiopian from the Queen of Ethiopia. Okay, so this is how the message was being preached. Okay, and then we all see coming up to Caesarea in Galilee. All right, the message was also preached in this area. So these are some of the things that you know that when God is sending people to preach the gospel, this is how the gospel went out. It went out from the Middle East. It did not come from the white man, and it did not come from the black man. Okay, it went out from the Middle East. And remember, 35 AD, it was very peculiar because Peter and John went to Sebastian in Samaria, where they prayed for the new Samaritan in Acts 8:14-25. And the Samaritan also received Christ. Later, Peter also visits the believers in Lydda, where he heals a man that had been bedridden for over 8 years in Acts 9. And Peter is called to Joppa. He goes to Joppa, where Tabitha was, that the dead woman that he raised back to life. That was Acts 9. Okay, he also traveled to Caesarea. I'm showing you all these things so you see that Christianity originated indeed from the Middle East, and these disciples were the first ones that took the message. All right. Peter also reports back to the Jewish believers in Jerusalem. So even in the Middle East, they were the ones that pushed the message even in Jerusalem in Acts 11. And then Peter met Paul in Antioch. All right. Remember, Barnabas had to take Paul to go to Antioch. When he went to take Paul in Tarsus, and they went to Antioch. Peter also met Paul in Antioch in 15 AD, shortly after the Council of Jerusalem. That's in Galatians 2. Okay, and then Peter writes from Rome to the Jewish people in 1 Peter 1:1. The Jewish believers, not the Jewish people, the Jewish believers that were in the Roman provinces of Asia, all right, Minor Asia, which is now Europe. So there was constant communication between them. Constant communication, and this is how the message was spread. Okay, so if you notice this area, all of this area was Europe. Okay, so the Ephesians, this Ephesus, the Ephesians, we all know the letter to the Ephesians. The Corinthians, Corinth, we all know the letter. The Philippians, all right, we all know the letter to the Philippians by Paul. And then the Romans in Rome. Okay, and notice that all these letters, even the Galatians here, this whole place was Galatia. all these letters, you will notice that Paul was very, very insistent on making sure they get the doctrines right and that they leave no room for false doctrines or false preachers. And that's why he even asked that the women don't speak. And I'm going to talk about that as well, because Paul's background was a Roman. Okay, Romans did not believe in feminine equality or anything like that. Okay, it was a Roman thing, and that's why when he said that, he always pointed them to their husbands so that they can go. And but it wasn't like it was based on his background and his tradition. All right, but when Jesus was alive, you see he welcomed the women. Okay, he taught with Mary. He did not send Mary to the kitchen like Martha was. Mary sat at his feet. So Jesus was welcoming, was very inviting when it comes to the women. He treated women as equal to the male disciples. It was just Paul's background that he said, and many of the things that came from him, he noted it in the Bible, that this is my opinion, this is what I feel. Okay, he did not say this is what God says. Okay, there are certain things he said, God said this. Okay, and that is different. So from here we see all the places where they spread the gospel. All right, they spread it north, all right, to the Europeans, and then they spread it south to the Africans. But remember, the Holy Spirit forbid them to go to Asia. So that's why it was not mentioned in the Bible of them going to preach in Asia. But they went all the way to Corinth, all the way to Italy in Rome. Okay. And they also went down to Egypt and Ethiopia. They met with the Ethiopian. Okay. So that's how we know that the gospel came from the Middle East, and it was preached by Jesus's disciples and Paul, who was later converted to Christianity. And then I will give you one more map here, because I want you to see something else that was very significant. All right, because that will come to the next aspect I want to talk about. And this is Asia Minor. This area is the map of the growth of Antioch, and it was mentioned that this area was the Gentile area, the Gentile church, because the white people were called Gentiles. All right. The Romans, those who were not Christians, were called Gentiles. And so after the stoning of Stephen, remember I told you after Stephen was stoned, people ran, and I would have run too, because to see him die like that, many people ran and they dispersed. So when they dispersed, some who were Greek-speaking Jews, they traveled to Antioch in Syria, all right, which is now current day Turkey. And they spread the good news there to the Jews that were living there. Other believers from Cyprus and Cyrene, they arrived also in Antioch, and they preached to the Gentiles there. Okay, Barnabas, he was sent to investigate the new Gentile believers in Antioch to make sure they were learning the correct word. Okay, that was in Acts 11:22 to 24. And he goes to Tarsus to bring Paul. Remember, I told you he brought Paul in 43 AD. He brought Paul to Antioch. So they all went to Antioch. And then Barnabas and Paul, they traveled to Jerusalem, and they took gifts to those who were suffering during the famine. In Acts 11, there was a famine. There was one of the, I think it was, I think we read it earlier, of a man that prophesied that there will be famine. So when the famine started, Barnabas and Paul took gifts to those who were suffering from famine in Jerusalem. Okay. And then Barnabas and Paul returned to Antioch with John Mark. All right. He was also one of their new converts, and they were sent to Antioch in and to Cyprus. So all these places received, these were the early church. And we'll come and talk about the early church when we talk about the ecclesia, because this is very important for us to know where we came from as a church, because now if we don't know, we will get confused and just go with the flow, because now they're trying to erase our history. So the church needs to know your history, and the Black people also needs to know your history. All right. So if you see, this was the road to Damascus. All right, that Paul was arrested by the Holy Spirit, and so many other people on their way from Cyrene, Cyprus, they all went to Antioch. This is Tarsus. Okay, this is where Paul was transported. Okay, he was transported from the road to Damascus, and Barnabas had to go get him there to come to Antioch. So this is essentially what happened before the early church. All right. So remember, I spoke about false doctrines and false prophets. So that's where I'm going in now. With the white man's religion, there was false doctrines that was initiated into Christianity, just like we did for the Black man's religion. Remember, I told you the Black man's religion was full of other gods, and even though we had respect for the supreme being, but we also had other gods. And so a lot of things that we do even in the Black church was just because of traditions and based on the religion we used to have, okay, the gods we used to worship. Okay, so now what I will let you know is that the white man also had his own religion. In all of these areas that I'm talking about, Cyprus, even in Antioch, they were Greeks. They used to have their own gods, the Greek gods. Okay, and so let's talk about the white man's religion. First of all, the first thing that you guys need to know about the white man's religion is the fact that he was involved in slavery. Okay, I believe it sharing. Okay, so he was involved in slavery. Ezekiel 27 gives a long list of the occupation that some of these Japheth descendants had. And here you see Javan, Tubal, and Meshach. They were thy merchants. They traded the persons of men and vessels of brass in thy market. I think this is my KJV, but if you read the New Testament, the New Translation, New Living Translation, you will see that when it talks here about persons of men, they traded persons of men. It meant they traded slaves. So that was their work. They were merchants of slavery. So that's the first thing. So if you want to know their background, you remember Javan, Tubal, and Meshach. These are Japheth's descendants. Okay, let me pull that up because probably you might not. Okay, let me go. Let's see. the descendants of Japheth, because probably you might have forgotten. So let me pull. I made a small thing here that you can see very clearly. All right. So Japheth in Genesis 5 verse 32, that's where we learn about Japheth. He was like the Gentile, the leader of the Gentile nations. So when the Bible referred to Gentiles, majority it's talking about Japheth's descendants. Okay. And they are often mentioned to be the heathen, the foreigner. You know, when the Bible talks about foreigners, when the Bible talks about people who are not Jews, when it talks about heathen is like non-believers. They were talking about majority of them is Japheth's people. All right. So from Goma, we have the Celtic people. All right. Magog, we have the Russians. Madai, we have the Medes. Javan, we have the Greek people, the Syrians. Tubal was the ones who lived south of Black Sea. Meshech was the Russians, and then Tiras was Thracians. Okay, and Javan, they went on to become most of the Europeans. Tarshish was the Spanish people, and you have these who became the Celtic people. So all of them are the descendants of Japheth. So when I'm talking about their gods, you would understand where I'm coming from. So let's get into it. So when you hear the white man's religion, what are they talking about? It's not Christianity, period. The white man's religion has to do with many other gods. Many other gods. So remember, as you can see here, the Japheth's descendants are the Greeks, the Romans, the Celtic people, the Cretans, people from Crete. They had their unique gods and goddesses. That's why when I say goddess, some people think I'm talking about something else. So that's why I like to refine my definition of what I mean by goddess, because you have people who still worship those goddesses. Okay. My definition of goddess is the fact that I am made in the image and likeness of God, and I aspire for more, to be like him, to learn from him, to have his heart for people, to know his mind. Okay. And that's what I crave for daily. And I will never be perfect until I meet him one day. Okay. So it's a continuous process. All right. I am not a God. I am not a big G. I am a little G, a small G, aspiring for greatness in his image and in his likeness. But here, when we're talking about gods and goddesses, these were gods that people created. Most of them were statues and paintings. And that's how the Bible re-emphasizes, you shall not have make any graven image. You shall not have any other God but me. Idolatry started with Japheth's descendants. They would make this graven image. They would always build something, a statue or the calf, the golden calf, and worship it, because that is how they did that. That was their form of worship. Okay, so the first thing we notice from Japheth's family or Japheth's descendants is slavery. Okay, that we saw from Ezekiel 27. The second thing is idolatry. So if you notice any of those forms creeping into Christianity, you know it is not from God. It is not from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is an influence from the white man's religion. This is an influence from Japheth's descendants. which is why Paul spent all his life with all the letters that he kept sending was depart from the doctrines of your ancestors and the doctrines of your traditions, because this is not of God. This is not the gospel. All right. And so even today, we have the creeping in of doctrines and traditions that is not of God. And it is time that we start pointing these things out. Instead of pointing people out, let's point the doctrines out. Let's dictate to people what these things really are, because you keep calling people false prophets. We don't know what is it that they're saying that is false. The first thing is slavery. Anybody justifying slavery as a form of Christianity is not telling you the truth, because that is a Japheth influence from the white man's religion. That is not the influence of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit does not enslave people or treat people as if one is superior over the other. Okay. The second thing, as I told you, is idolatry. They have all these gods and goddesses. The Greeks, they have Zeus, who was the god of thunder. Even in black man's religion, we have the god of thunder, or the god of war, called Ogun. We have also we have fertility gods and whatever. The Greeks had that too. Okay. They have Hera, who was the goddess of marriage and family. Poseidon, the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses. Athena, the god of wisdom. Apollo, the god of sun, music, and prophecy. All right. So they have their own prophets too, and they have their own musicians too. All right. That Apollo god is something that our music industry, the modern music industry, is very aware of. All right. You have Artemis, the goddess of hunt and the moon, which is how witchcraft comes in, and hunting include cannibalism and all these things, where even human beings are cooked and eaten. All right. All of these things, they come from the Japheth influence. Goddess of love and beauty, Aphrodite. And that is how this sexual and sensual sins and lustful thing comes from. That is the goddess that they worship. All right. Aries, the god of war, which is why they are very warlike. They want to fight all the time. They want to kill. There's this longing for blood, because they serve the god of Aries. So these are the things I'm telling you. Anything that has to do with lust, it's a influence of Japheth. Anything that has to do with war and killing and blood, influence of Japheth. Anything that has to do with this craving for wisdom and enlightenment and all these things, is an influence of Japheth. Anything that has to do with power and influence and superiority, is an influence of Japheth. Zeus. Anything that has to do with the fact that you want to have 10 million kids, even though you can't necessarily take care of them, or you don't even care for them, you just want to have 10 million kids. I don't even know why. Is the influence of Japheth. Anything that has to do with skills, that you want to excel in music, but you want to use other influences and other, is the influence of Japheth. Okay. The fertility goddess, influence of Japheth. All right. Where they sacrifice kids, it's the influence of Japheth. All right. Hades, the god of the underworld. So all these underworld stuff, influence of Japheth. The god of trade, Hermes. Slavery, slave trade, sex slaves, influence of Japheth. All right. So all these things, as I keep telling you, it came through the white man's religion. So if you want to talk about the white man's religion, that is the white man's religion, guys. It's not Christianity. Don't let anybody fool you. The white man's religion is not Christianity. These are their gods. And I had other pictures, but I don't want to put those pictures over here. But you see this? Because the rest of the other ones were not suitable. They're full of sensual, you know, things. Like even this one has some, messed up thing here. Let me just block it a little bit. But hey, that's what they do. That is their gods, and they don't care. They don't care. It is all about becoming this, and that's how you see gladiators start. The it's a lot. It has a lot to do with the fighting and all of these things. So these are the characteristics of the white man's religion. Okay. So we just dealt with the Greek gods. You do have the Roman gods too. All right, the Roman gods. And that played a whole lot when if we start talking about Catholicism, the Catholics, they had a lot of influence from the Roman gods. And, even though they became baptized and they became converted, Cornelius and all these people that became converted, they still had influences from where they were coming from. Because one thing I want you to know, it's a lot to have served other gods all your life, and then you're older now, maybe 35, 45, and now they say, no, you should only serve the one true living God, and he has a son who died for you. It is hard to distinguish. Okay, so I no longer do this anymore. I used to do this for my gods, so now you're telling me I shouldn't do this anymore. So it was hard. That's why Paul kept talking about these doctrines. So you do have Jupiter, that is the king of the gods, which is equated to Zeus. They had so many others. They have the same Apollo, the god of the sun and music. All right, that's why you will always see, if they're talking about that god, they will show the rays of the sun. Okay, because that's their Greek and Roman god, or Apollo. They have the god of war. They have one. Okay, Hermaphrodite, the equivalent of Hermaphrodite, they have Venus. All right, Diana also is the god of hunt and moon. Okay, that's how you see how they howl. And it's done in several other organizations that some of you join, and you say it's not of God. I mean, you say it's godly, it's Christian, because now they've incorporated it into Christianity. You see your pastor is a member, you see your reverend, your bishop is a member, but all of these things are embedded in the white man's religion. They're embedded in the worship of Roman gods and the worship of Greek gods. And that's why some of you who are a part of some of these organizations, you see that you have to either study the Greek language, or you see some Greek letters and stuff like that. It's all embedded. Okay, it's a Japheth influence. And then you have the Celtic gods. The Celtic gods, they have Dagba, Dagda. Dagda. He is the god of strength. All right, and that's how they have this patriarchy thing, and they always subdue women, they always marginalize women, they always degrade women, and they always think women are stupid, women are not supposed to, all of that, because of this manly thing. And with God, a man's strength is measured by his ability to take care of his family, by his ability to love his wife like Christ loved the church, by his ability to protect. That is God's own idea of a man, of a manly man. But with these gods, the Celtic gods and all this, it's the man's ability is shown by his um his manly, by violence, by um marginalizing other people, taking over people's lands, taking over people's crops, and making them pay for anything violent. That's an influence of Japheth's gods. Okay. And then you have warfare. Obviously, they have the god of warfare is everywhere. They have the god of thunder. They have this horned god. All right. That's why anything that you see, they always have these horns. Our God Almighty don't have horns. Okay. Anything with horns, it's not the worship of God. Absolutely. That one we all know. They also have gods of animals and nature. That's why some of them, they don't eat meat. Okay. Because they worship it. In the Hinduism religion also, that's another thing. They don't eat meat. But our Bible tells us that eat. Do not call anything unclean that God has cleansed, that God has put in this earth. So some of you who, and it's entirely up to you, but if you want to know where that came from, that's where it came from. Okay. And that's why most of them didn't want to eat. All right. Until God had to reinforce it in their minds that they can eat. Okay. And then you have this god of fertility. Obviously we all know we have that also in Africa. And then they have snake goddess. That is the serpentine spirit, is also in Africa. So they serve several gods. You can look at the Cretan gods. So it's not something I'm making up. No, it's actually there. All right. And then you have the bull as well, the bull leaping goddess, same horns. Okay. And then, so all of these are Greek and Roman gods, and it's well documented. It's not something I just pulling out of my head. These are mythologies that are concrete. They're literature you can read about. You can even watch them ancient movies, and you see them at work. All right. I used to binge watch with my late husband. He loved, we would watch Game of Thrones, we would watch um, Marlene, Lord of the Rings. He was just awesome. But we used to binge watch all those movies because I used to love those movies until I got some of these downloads. I'm like, nah, I can't watch these anymore. But yeah, so and remember, the Celtic people, they are the ones that became the Irish, the Welsh, the Scottish. Okay, those are the Celtic people. All right. And then you have the Greeks and the Romans. And okay, so the white man's religion is not Christianity, from all what I've told you so far. Okay, it's based on European colonization, that some of these things were introduced into Christianity, also based on the believers that were now becoming Christians, like the Romans, and they did not have the full gospel because it was handed down to them. Remember, Christianity was highly persecuted, so they didn't get, it was not always through the original disciples. And this was why Paul had to write all those letters, because they did not get the original word from the people who were originally with Jesus. They had hand me downs. And remember, the Bible had not been compiled at that time yet. So they just grasped whatever they could get, and then they added what they knew as religion, all right, before. So that's how, how some of them became Christians and how some of them were essentially converted. All right. So many of them strongly believed this is it. This is the Bible. But obviously it was not. And it was passed down to generations to a point where some people still believe, and it's not what God was about or what the gospel was about. Okay. So the historical context was Christianity originated from the Middle East, and then it was spread by the Jews who were converted to the Greek people, all right? And obviously through Paul, who was an original Roman, all right? And because of he became very instrumental to spread it to the Greeks, because he was just like them, right? And that is why it was dominant with the white people. The religion became dominant with the white people and the Europeans, because first of all, Paul spoke their language, so they didn't have any language barrier. Also, they had all these letters and they were learned, so they could read and they could understand it. And the history of everything, the culture, and the church started in Antioch. So all of that was very, I mean, they understood the gospel a little better than Africa, because it didn't get to us on time. All right. But between the 15th and 19th centuries, because of exploration and the colonization of the Europeans, Christianity spread across the world. Now, there is a myth that Christianity was forced on us, especially in Africa. And I want to dispel that myth, because we had several missionaries that were sent to Africa who did not force nobody. In fact, these missionaries were killed. Some of them were persecuted. Some of them were run out of the places because just note that, first of all, we had people coming to take people as slaves. And there was a kind of rebellion against that in later on. So when missionaries started coming, they thought, oh, these people wanted to come take our people as well. So there was a lot of kickback against it. Okay, so I, for one, have seen missionaries in Africa, a lot of them. And so I believe that Christianity was not forced down our throats. Now, with slaves, that's a little different. Okay. And remember, slavery, there was a lot of slave masters who probably would not even want their slaves to learn how to read. So they didn't force us. It was accepted. Okay. Christianity was accepted. Were some of them forced? Yes. Okay. But again, as I said, it's not all white people that were slave masters. There were a lot of people who couldn't afford to be slave masters. There are a lot of white people who did not have slaves. Okay, so we cannot just say Christianity was forced down our throat, but because of Christianity, we used it, especially when we learned how to read. We used the Bible to be freed from slavery. And so we should be grateful for Christianity, even from Africa. We should be grateful. Like I am grateful that there were missionaries that actually went to my ancestors and told them about Jesus. Today, there were churches in Africa that I was a part of that made me born again today, and I'm grateful. All right. And we had Anglican churches, we had Methodist churches in Africa, we had all these, and they were not just instrumental in educating people. All right. I went to one of those schools where we were brought up in the Christian faith. Okay, even as girls, it was an all-girls school, and it was a purely faith-based school, and we had so many of those, and so many of us came out, as excellent women doing excellent things. So I keep imploring you. Christianity did a whole lot of good in Africa, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise, okay? And it also caused cultural changes, it also caused social changes, but majority of it was for good. Okay, so when Christianity is being perceived as a white man's religion because of colonialism or whatever, I strongly do not want to buy into that, because even those who justify slavery using the Bible were in error. It's in error because the Bible teaches about equality, it teaches about love, and we focused on that in our last episode, and we're going to focus a little more when we talk about the ecclesia. Okay, so the adaptation of Christianity was not just in Africa, but in Asia, in Latin America, and now all over the world. Okay, and it's diverse everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's Christianity, but we still have more work to do, because a lot of places there is a lot of persecution of Christians. And you notice that I focused on that during the Christmas period when I became connected with the people of Pakistan. And there is so many other people who are going through a lot of persecution. All right. Okay, so the modern day Christianity is also being influenced by our modern day traditions. All right. For example, the Greek mythology is still active. It's still active even in our modern day Christianity. All right. We all know about the Trojan War. Well, those of you who have read, um, if you read about the kingdoms of Troy and all these things, they had heroes like Achilles and Hector. These people were fighters. So even with conflict from the ancient days, it's now creeping into Christianity, in which some people think that is what makes a Christian, or that is what makes you powerful. That is what makes you a man. Or that is what makes you a powerful leader. If you fight, if you create war, if you do this, but that is wrong. That is utterly wrong. We want to avoid war at all costs. There were times when Jesus knew that there was a confrontation about to happen. He would retreat. He would go somewhere. When he knew they were about to stone him, or there was going to be war and his time had not come yet, he would just leave the area. Okay, he avoided war at all costs. Even when the disciple tried to cut that man's ear when they came to arrest him, he put the ear back, because he didn't come to create war. He came, he's a prince of peace. He came for peace. Okay, any influence of war and fighting, and it's either Islam influence, Islamic influence, or Greek and Roman influence. Okay, and the story of um, the man that had the body of a man and then the head of a bull in Crete, Labyrinth, and all of that. That is another form of Um, Another form of an influence that is creeping in, I wouldn't say into Christianity, but with Christians. Okay. And I'm not going to go too in depth into that. But those of you who know, you know. Okay. So this worship of other gods. And then there's this mythology of Odin, all about destruction and, um, all those things. The Norse, it's called the Norse mythology, is the same thing: destruction, fighting, war, death, blood. Anything that is related to all of that is not Christianity, it's a white man's religion. Then they have the cosmology, which is all these cosmic things and stars and worship of the patterns and in the sky and all these cosmos energy. And now they making it look cool, and even our Gen Z love it, and that is the vibe now. It's all a white man's influence, white man's religious influence. Okay. And then with the Celtics too, they have this superhero thing, and we see that in our movies. It's all, you know, man's thoughts of becoming something more than they truly are, this godlike being. And so people start calling themselves gods, you know. um it's also an influence of the white man's religion. Okay. The Irish started those folk tales, and now, they believe that humans can be that too. You can manifest things, and and the magic, and and do some of it work? Yes, it does. It's been working for years. So yeah, but God's power is greatest, and you should not mix with the occult. It never ends well. And then some of you know the stories of the Camelot. Those of you who've read or you've watched legends like King Arthur with the British leaders, there are some romantic folk tales and all those things. You will notice that women are treated as sex slaves, like anything. They don't value us, and they don't see us as worthy partners. That is an influence of the white man's religion. Marlin, I told you, my late husband and I used to watch him. He had this wizard and magical powers, extra wisdom, and all of that. And that is another thing that is creeping in. It's already in, and now it's being converted to New Age religion. And then so many, so many things. Um, we had this knights kind of thing, this conquest, when they used to fight, and they used to it's called, they were like the gladiators or something. And then they will have this big arena, and they will fight, and you have to kill. Like, even if you want to spare even if you've won the fight and you want to spare your opponent, no, they like, no, you need to kill him to show that you're a man, to show that you're, so no mercy, no compassion, nothing. That is not of God. That is anything that doesn't show, any man that doesn't show compassion for others, that is an influence of the white man's religion. Okay. And that is the Celtic mythology. No compassion, no. You have to, show strength doing that. And then you have the slave thing. There's a lot when it comes to slave, where there's a god and a slave, and a lot of even in their doctrines, that's the thing, like you are like a slave. And so you should not argue, you just do what they tell you. There's this humiliation thing. You are humiliated no matter how, they want to cut you down to size. They want to make you humiliate you, like a humiliation ritual. All of that is a white man's religion. That's their doctrine. Okay, the slave and the master kind of, and even though we are considered to be slaves, when it comes to, but the Bible really talks more about friendship with God. I am a friend of God. We're slaves to righteousness. In it's kind of, but we once were slaves to bondage. The Bible always consider when we were with the devil as slavery, but with him is freedom. So in the Bible sense, in Christianity, it talks about freedom, that anything that keeps you in bondage, or that humiliates you, that cuts you down and make you feel less, try to humiliate you to um so that you will not be pumped up or whatever that is. It's not Christian. It's always influence from the white man's religion. Um, there's so many. There's so many. They have the Father Frost, the Russians. They have fairy tales about, powerful men, that shows their whiteness and stuff like that. And that's where the white supremacy comes from. And then the Germans also have their own like the dragon stories and things like that, which is why they have all these influences of battle and fighting, and ghosts. They believe in ghosts as well. um it's a lot. Okay, it's a lot. So all these myths and all these stories and all these things have crept into things that are not necessarily in the Bible, but because of ancient traditions, exorcisms, and all these things have crept into Christianity, right? Folk magic too. All right, they want to use something to make it extraordinary, and even though there's a place for miracles, but they want to force and do it all the time. It has to happen every single time. So they try to find supernatural powers to make this happen, or conjure some kind of powers to make them influential, things like that. And so there has been all these pagan practices, superstitions, heresies that crept into the early church. And even now, okay, even the witchcraft thing, the idolatry thing, or is creeping, where some people think, oh, you can worship God and worship the Greek gods, and worship the pagan gods, and do the pagan traditions and stuff, in and alongside. But it doesn't work like that. It doesn't. It doesn't. Also, these witchcraft things. There are some people who are Christians and they believe in their hearts that they can still be witches, thinking they can help God. they're trying to, oh, we want people to fear God and know that we have power. So we can do this on the side. So people fear God. No, that you can't help God. You can't use witchcraft in the church and think that's okay because you're making people believe God more. No, they in fact they're going away from God. Okay. And I told you it also affected the Catholic Church in that there's some things that they did, okay, even with young boys, that it was very prevalent, um, that allegedly that was happening in the Catholic Church. And it's as a result of the history of the Romans and this lust and sexual sins that happen when people are in religion, and so it's always been there. Homosexuality and all those things have always been a part of the worship of Roman and Greek gods and Celtic gods, and so it crept into Christianity as well. And then obviously, there are a lot of things. I used to question when we used to have like candles in the church, because we were in the big churches, and my dad always used to say, keep quiet. But for me, candles, I used to see them like, why do we have candles? Like the Bible talks about lamps, but it was because they didn't have electricity back then. That's why they had lamps. So why do we have candles in church when we have electricity? It's not dark. But anyway, so I used to question that. I also used to question things like in the African religion, we used to, like, if somebody dies, we used to have like 7 days, 40th day, 1 year they would do something every time. But then it wasn't just the ceremony, because it's good to remember our people, our the dead. I remember my late husband all the time. But then they'll have this hole that they will dig, and then they will cook all this food, and then we have to pour the food in the hole, and then they'll leave just, they'll leave some, but they'll pour, and you have to wait until they pour all that in the food in the hole, and then we all come and pray. And it's not prayer to any, they pray Christian prayers. So they've included this ceremony with the Christianity. And we're praying Christian prayers, but we're dumping food in a hole. Like, why? And we can't eat until they do that ceremony. So we'll be hungry, especially I was a kid back then, and we used to stand there and just wait. They have to put this thing in this hole before we eat. So I used to question, like, why? Why are they putting all that food in the hole? And why are they pouring alcohol on the floor and on the ground and in the doorway and all of that? So, and they used to pray. It's not like they used to believe it's part of Christianity, and so even visit the graveside every year. To start the year, you have to go to the graveside onto all the graves. So I used to question those things. And to this day, I keep questioning things in the church. And it's time we speak, because there are some things that are not Christianity, and it is pushing people away from God rather than bringing them closer. So again, as I mentioned, the white man's religion had a lot to do with our practices in Christianity. And then the Great Persecution also eradicated Christianity for a while. But then in 313 AD, Constantine, who was a Roman emperor, was very significant in granting Christians religious freedom, which is why we are grateful right now for Constantine, because that ended the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. And since that time, the church grew and it became more dominant in Europe. But then there were some disputes. Um, it's called the Great Schism, where the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Roman Catholic Church split in 1054 BC. AD, sorry, and that was as a result of the same heresy. There were a lot of people not happy with some of the things that was done in the Catholic Church, and so they decided to form their own the Orthodox churches. There were violent crusades against them. They were persecuted, but they grew. So that's how denominations came into play. And every now and then there is a new group that separates themselves from the other group because of the heresy they found out. And it shouldn't have been that way. We should have been able to sit down and talk about these heresies and notice that, oh, these things, they were not originally in the Bible. They were just things we took from our ancient traditions because of the worship of other gods. And that was what we introduced into Christianity. But this is not it. We could have sat down and talked about these things, but no, we didn't. So more denominations kept growing as we kept seeing some of these erroneous doctrines, you know, um, the Protestants, reformers, I think it was Martin Luther and John Calvin, they did their own split. And then we had, the several other the totalitarian regimes. It's particularly with the Nazis, Nazi Germany thing after or during the World War II, where Christians who opposed Nazi, including some who were like actively resisted or helped Jewish people, they faced imprisonment and execution. So as a result, there was a whole lot of conflicts within Christianity and even outside, political oppression. All right. But there were other significant influences from Europe, including Freemasonry. I think I spoke about that, a fraternal organization that had influences on the Christian faith and even our leaders, because most of them were leaders in the church. And you all know Freemasonry looks for the greatest and the best. That's what my dad used to say. And because he was very intelligent, and that's the kind of people they look for. And so he started off in I think he continued when he went to Scotland, because that was where he married my mom, and he was a Freemason in Scotland. And so I know that there was a lot of presence. I think the first Freemason lodge or the Grand Lodge was in England. So they had a huge influence in the European church and in the monarchy as well. So all of that contributed to the Christianity we have today. So don't blame anybody. Don't blame anybody for, for example, when there was or when there is like a divide in the Christian church between whites and blacks. Okay, because even with the Freemasons, they had the whites lodges and the black lodges until later on they came together. So it's the same thing. There is always that divide. There's always that divide. even back until they realize that no, we are all one. And so there is a lot of influences. And so don't blame Christianity for everything without knowing the context, without knowing where these things came from. All right? You don't know where these things came from. But if you read the Bible, that's why we always refer you back to the Bible. If you read the Bible, you will know that these things was not originally in the Bible. Okay, this thing about enlightenment and all these things, it's not originally in the Bible. So it's a lot when it comes to the white man's religion, but I want to implore you to please go back to the Bible. Go back to the Bible and read it. And next episode, we'll talk about the early church, because that will help us to understand better how the church started. And so we can weed out all the unnecessary things that we added along the way. That was not it at the beginning. Okay. And some things we added were good, actually. We'll talk about some of those, but a lot of things that we added was not right. It was not. So I'm going to end the recording right now. I want to start publishing by next week. So whenever we meet again, probably we'll just go live, or I will record it and then we can talk about it. And then if we can't meet until next week, I might record one by myself to complete this episode's the ecclesia. And then when we meet, we'll just go straight to talk about relationships, how to bag the ring. If one thing I know how to do is to get married, to get a ring on my finger, so I can talk about that. All right. So we will meet and talk about how to bag the ring. But I will finish this ecclesia thing probably by myself, and then we'll meet. So let me end the recording here, and then if you have your questions, let's talk. And if you have your comments. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye. Thank you.
Ever woken up from a dream, feeling it holds a message just for you? With 5-Star Bible Dreams, you can unlock the secrets of your nightly visions. Imagine decoding a dream of a lion wearing a crown, or embarking on a journey through unknown lands.
This app connects your dreams with biblical symbols, offering profound insights tailored just for you. Thousands have transformed their lives, discovering deeper understanding and spiritual growth. Step into the realm of dreams and let 5-Star Bible Dreams guide you to uncover your divine purpose.
Your dreams are waiting to be awakened.